All right, so here we are. We have returned yet again. For those of you out in internet land, it is Thursday, October 29th. This Saturday is Halloween, and we are in our 9th annual expose of Halloween as an occultic and satanic ritual holiday that we've been doing since 2012. For those of you that follow us on YouTube and on Facebook, I posted our original 2012 expose, which we filmed live out on Monad Terrace, right on the waterfront on South Beach in 2012. And unfortunately, because we were using a different camera and I was very unsophisticated when it came to all types of technology things, we were only able to capture the first hour and then the 20 minutes of the question and answer session at the end. But it actually went from about 8 p.m. till midnight. But thankfully for you guys, I'm fast and efficient, and we won't be going for 4 hours tonight. We'll basically be trying to get through this in an expeditious amount of time. Whatever we don't fully cover tonight, we will finish up Saturday morning when we do our South Beach Saturday sermon. So again, occultic holiday is what Halloween is. I've called this talk Halloween Exposed, the occultic and satanic roots of the preeminent satanic holiday from a biblical and historical background. So a lot of history tied up in all of this, and the Bible has a lot to say about that. Where does Halloween trace its beginnings? It really starts, if I were to argue a particular position, I would have to say that Halloween started as far back as certainly the flood of Noah, but maybe even as far back as the Garden of Eden. Let's take a look at our 7,000-year timeline chart here. And let's take a look. Here we are in the Garden of Eden, got Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden. Why? Because Genesis chapter 3 tells us that Eve took the satanic gambit and ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in order to become the very first goddess, the very first wise one. She was, in fact, the very first witch, because she was a seeker of wisdom that would make her divine through occultic or hidden means. So it would be appropriate, if we're going to be realistic about this, to date all the way back to the fall in the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 3, for Eve to be the first of the long line of female practitioners, though the men can be involved as well, but primarily female practitioners who are known collectively as witches. In the religion of Wicca, which is the most popular religion in England right now, we call themselves Wiccans as opposed to witches, but the term is the same. Now, if I were to go to a second point and say the origin of Halloween can be traced to a certain time frame, I might go as far back as the flood of Noah. After the fall in the Garden of Eden, it occurred about 4000 BC, or about 6,000 years ago. The flood of Noah occurred at about 2400 BC, and again, the reason for that being the Nephilim had interbred, the fallen angels interbred with human women to create a race of super beings who themselves were monstrosities, known as the Nephilim. And that presaged or is the provoking incident that caused God to send the worldwide flood, which occurred in about 2400 BC, about 4,500 years ago. So we have the flood of Noah, and after the flood, Noah and his 3 sons and his wife. So 8 people in total: Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, a total of these people, Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives, they got into the ark. And what we find out then is that Noah's 3 sons that repopulated the earth after the flood were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And from his son Japheth came another son, Noah's grandson Gomer. And from those individuals, we have a group of people that trace their lineage all the way back, again, to Gomer, to Japheth, and eventually to Noah. And those people eventually became known as the Celtic people. And so the question, is anytime you look at the origins of Halloween, or who are the Celtic people? Well, we know we have a famous basketball team here in the United States of America called the Boston Celtics. Why? Because in Boston, a great portion of the population are former Irish immigrants who came over in 1840 during the Irish Potato Famine and brought with them the Roman Catholic religion, which had syncretized with it, and we'll get to that, the former pagan practices of Celtic Druidism. And so the term the Boston Celtics for the basketball team there is not a total accident, but it's really related to the indigenous Irish Catholic population in the city of Boston in Massachusetts. So why would they name their team after the Celtics or the Celtic people? Well, the Celtic people were the people that, again, trace their lineage back to Noah's son Japheth through Gomer, and we get the Galatian people, the Gauls, eventually the French, also derived from that line of individuals. So again, it's very kind of complicated to trace it down to one particular person, but that's really where the Celtic people got their start. And they eventually worked their way from the area in which Japheth occupied, eventually setting up headquarters in India, and eventually moving from India into the European peninsula or continent, and then from the European continent really settling down and becoming prominent in the area of the British Isles, which at the time was Britannia, what we now call Ireland and Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, what today we would call the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Wales, with Ireland and Northern Ireland as two separate sovereigns to the north of that. This is the area where these individuals, the Celtic people, eventually migrated from India, Europe, into the British Isles, and that's why the Irish are so closely related or associated with the Celtic individuals. Who were these Celtic people? These Celtic people were a group of people that after the flood of Noah, again, we have Adam, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and Ham had a son, and his name was Cush, and Cush had a son, and his name was Nimrod. So two of Noah's, one of Noah's grandsons, Gomer, and his great-grandson, Nimrod, play a large role in determining the origins of the Celtic people. And eventually, Nimrod and his wife Semiramis established the first real, one world government, city-state, nation-state in the area known as Babylon. And so it was from Babylon that the Celtic people eventually, got their rise. It was there in Babylon that, and let me grab our little land map there, might be able to help us out with depicting the Middle East. So it was really in this area, and here we go, we got a little map right here. So this is the map of the Middle East, and as we can see that Babylon, where the Tower of Babel was erected, was right here. Got the Euphrates River running through here, and we see that in the Old Testament, it was right here. So here's where you have ancient Babylon, and it's in ancient Babylon that the Celtic people got their real start and got their religion. And the religion that Nimrod created really was one that included and countenanced the sacrifice of human babies to appease the sky god and to cause the crops to grow. And eventually, Nimrod, who the Bible seems to suggest through some type of occultic ritual was able to tamper with and modify his DNA to make himself into the first of the self-made Nephilim godmen, and he eventually became worshipped as a god. And the whole goddess worship system arose up around the worship of himself and his wife as the Queen of Heaven, and him as the dying and resurrected sun god king. But we've gone through that at length before, but apart from that, the Mystery Babylon religious system got its start there in the city of Babylon, ancient Babylon, including blood sacrifice, sacrificing children, weird and perverted sexual rituals to appease the god of the sky. And eventually, when God scattered the people of Babylon by changing the languages, one of the people groups that scattered out and eventually made their way into what we now call India, and then eventually were referred to as the Indo-European people, were people who eventually became known as the Celts. And the Celts brought with them the abominable practices of the Babylonians in ancient Babylon, including blood sacrifices of children and worshiping of false gods, and paganism and deity worship and earth worship and nature worship. That is part and parcel of what it means to be a practitioner of the Celtic religion. And the leaders and the administrators of that religious belief system, once they departed from out of Babylon, moved into the Indo-European areas, were eventually called the Druids. The Druids were the high priests of this ancient Babylonian religious practice system. And the Druids were believed to be actually indwelt by these spirit beings. They were, in fact, demon-possessed. And they administered over the practice of what eventually became known as Druidism. And so Druidism exists to this very day, and Halloween as we know it today is really a modern day iteration of ancient Babylonian, Indo-European, Celtic Druidism. And that's the best way I can think of to explain it. And you know, one of the practices of the Druids was the Wicker Man ceremony. We have a ceremony that they have out in the desert in Nevada that's named in honor of that, where they call it the Burning Man, where they build a man in effigy, a gigantic straw man, and fill him, at least back in ancient Druidic times, they would fill them with human beings and animals and set them on fire and burn them. And that practice was eventually adopted into the practice of Druidism when it eventually worked its way into the British Isles. So the Burning Man or Wicker Man ceremony is very well known in Ireland and Scotland and England. And eventually, as the Irish Potato Famine brought a number of Irish Catholic immigrants, with them came the practice of what was all, originally Celtic Druidism that got refashioned after the Roman Empire arose and conflicted with them. So I made a chart. I think it's much easier if we just run through the chart and kind of try to give you a quick overview of how this all works out and gets us to where we are here today with what we call Halloween. And so let's start out. The fall in the Garden of Eden, we've got Eve becoming our very first Wiccan goddess, and that's about 4000 BC. And then what we find out then is in about 2400 BC, we've got Nimrod and Semiramis establishing the Mystery Babylon religion with the horned sun god of death and their goddess worship system, with human sacrifice as a sacrament of the fall harvest, because all of this is tied to the growing seasons. And in the summertime, the crops would grow, and in the fall, you would harvest the plants that grew in the crops. And so, again, that's why earth nature worship became so important for Druidism and modern day paganism even. And so, again, we go from point 2, Nimrod, Semiramis, Mystery Babylon in the city of Babylon, and eventually we have the Celtic Druid people, the forerunners of what the people that were eventually called the Aryans. Adolf Hitler was searching for the race of supermen known as the Aryans that were believed to have descended from the gods. Again, I think that's tied into the strange happenings of Genesis chapter 6, the creation of the Nephilim by the fallen angels and human earth women. But we have this people group, the Celtic people, are eventually moving from ancient Babylon into what we will call now the continent of Asia, as well as the country of India, And from there, they eventually worked their way into Europe. Sometimes they were called Celts, sometimes they were called Aryans, and they took up residence in the Caucasus Mountains, in Asia, near Russia, and as I said, eventually moved from Asia to India, to Europe, and while in Europe, they focused in the area surrounding Britannia, and the Scotch Gaelic people, who are the forebears of the Irish and the Scottish people, eventually were sort of the landing spot for these Celtic people. So in Europe, Britannia, Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales were the areas where these Celtic individuals, who were administered over by their priests called the Druids. And so point 3 on our 13 point, ironic, 13 is a big number in the occult, big number for Halloween and witchcraft and all of that, which will actually take place this coming Saturday. Presidential election will be the Tuesday after that. So here we are, 2020. What a fortuitous year. A year unlike any other year. Point 3 on our outline then, from about 2300 to 2000 BC, what do we have? We have the Celts, the forebears of the Aryans, the Indo-European Scotch Gaelic people. They have a practice as part of their religious system, which is really sort of an outgrowth of the ancient Nimrodian Babylonian worship system, where there was a fall harvest festival, again, because the crops grow. Instead, as it says in the book of Romans, instead of giving God, the God of the Bible, who created everything, the sun, the moon, stars, the universe, and all that in it is, in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, they worship the creation rather than the creator. So you've got Satan using the planet Earth as sort of a carrot on a stick to lure away the worship of God by the children of men. And so God, who deserves the worship because he's the creator of everything, has his worship deprived from him by Satan by the use of these paganized belief systems where you worship the planet Earth, you worship Mother Nature. You call it what you will, but in essence, they established a fall harvest festival based around 2 dates, October 31st and November 1st. November 1st was a day where the dead were worshipped. So you had the dead and ancestor worship by living people. So living people worshiping dead people on November 1st. And the day before that was, in fact, a day that you also, sort of like Christmas Eve would be for Christmas right now. And hold on to that thought. And so I hope it's not too confusing for you guys. But yeah, so you had this religious system that was run by the Celtic Druid priests. It was referred to as SAH-WEEN, spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N. Samhain is how it looks like it should be pronounced, but that's sort of a Scotch Gaelic word. That was the word that it was referred to by once this religious practice had worked its way into the British Isles, particularly into Ireland and Scotland. SAH-WEEN, which is when you would worship the dead, and you would do things like dressing as demons, you would go door to door, food gathering, which is where we get our trick-or-treating. But again, let me explain. The October 31st was the day before the Day of the Dead. And so October 31st became the special day. SAH-WEEN really means the end of the harvest, literally means end of the harvest, or harvest end. And so SAH-WEEN was both a religious date set for October 31st, and it was also eventually sort of anthropomorphized into sort of a god-man that lived in the sky that was referred to as SAH-WEEN, or later became known as the Green Man, or the god in the sky who would make the crops grow and would marry, Semiramis, the Queen of Heaven, or Mother Nature, or Persephone and Pluto is another ancient Greek myth that sort of plays out the fall harvest festival theme. And so some of the rituals that arose from the SAH-WEEN festival, which was the fall harvest festival that was set for October 31st into November 1st, because they would do things from sunset to sunset of the next day. They would count the day sort of the way Israel would. So you would dress up as demons because it was believed on that day, that is the day when the spiritual veil that separated the living from the dead was at its thinnest, and that the dead could come through the veil dimensionally and either torment and haunt people or bless them and give them things. So what you would do is you would dress up as a demon to scare away other demons, or if you had to go out to the store, you would walk out dressed up as a demon. The idea being, if the demons were wandering around on October 31st and they saw you, they wouldn't harass you because they would think you're one of them. So compromising, dressing up like a demon to be considered one of the demons, to gain favor, curry favor with the demons, or at the very least to prevent them from hurting you. You would go door to door, food gathering. And so people believe that the demons would come back from the dead, or these dead spirit beings would come back from the dead and could knock on your door and demand basically tribute. So you would leave them things on the front door, or if somebody showed up at your door looking like a monster or a demon, you would give them something sweet to eat. And so people began dressing up, imitating these demonic entities and going door to door, and found out on this night they could gather food and sweetmeats and things of that nature. And that's where the whole trick-or-treating, door-to-door idea or concept came from, really as far back as 2000 BC, long before the birth of Jesus. You had the Celtic Druids practicing the religion of SAH-WEEN, which was the fall harvest festival of October 31st, with going door to door, and also the Wicker Man, where you would make a sacrifice to the sky god by building this effigy of a man in the form of a gigantic straw man, if you will, and putting animals and even human beings in it, and then setting it on fire on October 31st and burning them alive to appease SAH-WEEN, the god of the sky, and make the crops grow better. Again, fall harvest festival, into the growing season, you would gather in all the crops into the barn, and as the temperatures drop, the earth would die for the fall and the winter, and you would wait for rebirth in the springtime. So you had these harvest cycles based upon the 4 seasons: winter, summer, fall, spring. And so again, you had other ceremonies such as the human bonfire, which was really a way of saying bonefire. You would set people on fire and burn them until they were nothing but bones left, again, to appease the SAH-WEEN god who caused the crops to grow, or appease the horned god of death. And when the people were set on fire in either the Wicker Man or in the bonfires, which we now call bonfires, like if in the Midwest where I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, we would go out on hay rides, and there would be Halloween hay rides. You know, you could go out to the farms that surrounded the area. Ann Arbor was really built in a grove of oak trees, and again, Druids. That term really means the men of oak. The Druids were the men of oak, and that's where they got that title, Druid, from, because they worshipped the oak trees. So back in Michigan, you'd have hay rides on Halloween. You'd go on farms and you would pick pumpkins, and and then you'd have a bonfire at night and tell scary stories around the bonfire. Bonfires really started as bonfires, where you would set people on fire, either in the Wicker Man or in the bonfire, and then you would have the Druid priest interpret the screams of the people being burned to death so that they could prophesy what would happen in the coming year. So again, what we see as modern day Halloween traditions, which is now kind of considered an American tradition, and I pointed out in times past that there is a tremendous amount of money being made in the Halloween industry. And to jump ahead just to our final point, $8.2 billion in Halloween sales in the United States alone in 2012. By 2017, it had gone up to $9.1 billion. Now we're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 billion a year. Now this year with COVID-19 and all of that, it remains to be seen what will really happen this coming Saturday, which is Halloween. But I know last Halloween, Halloween of 2019, South Beach Gospel Ministry, we went out and did our first annual Halloween track attack on Lincoln Road. We passed out thousands of gospel tracks, some of them Halloween themed, to the thousands of revelers dressed in costumes or whatever on Lincoln Road all night long. I think Halloween fell on a Friday night last year. And so yeah, absolutely. We got thousands of people. I was there till about 1 in the morning and the rest of our crew was there. This year, don't know what's going to happen with social distancing and all of that stuff. So we don't know what the final sales would be, but we're about a $10 billion a year industry in terms of sales of, goblins and Halloween costumes and all of the things that are related back to the period of time of 300 years from 2300 BC to 2000 BC, when the Celtic people and their Druid priests were establishing all of these different ceremonial distinctives that became part of the festival of SAH-WEEN. And so, fast forward again, point 4. We find in 47 AD, now we've gotten this Celtic Druidic practice that has existed from shortly after the dispersion of human beings from the Tower of Babel in the fall of the city of Babylon, all the way through the time of Christ to about 47 AD, when a Roman general, Julius Caesar, defeats the Celtic individuals during the Gallic Wars. And that occurred, as I said, about 47 BC. And Julius Caesar writes back to Rome. He says, man, we've defeated these Celtic individuals, these opposers of the spread of the Roman Empire, and they have these strange practices. They have these religious leaders called the Druids, and they do abominable things like burning and killing their own children to appease their gods. And Julius Caesar, after he gets the victory, writes in his famous writing, The History of the Gallic Wars, he denotes that Rome's victory was a reason, or at least gave occasion for the banishment of what even Rome thought was the incredibly barbaric religious practice system known as Druidism that was practiced by the Celtic people as being barbaric. So these Druids and their priests had to go underground and go into hiding. Stonehenge in England is really a Druidic worship altar built outside and aligned to the stars. So they knew a lot about astrology and stargazing and star worship and seasonal worship. Again, it was a nature religion where you worship rocks and trees. The Druids were the men of oak, the oak men, because they believed gods lived in the trees, and so they worshiped the trees. And as funny as it sounds, it actually had some very, very serious consequences. And so Rome basically outlawed Druidism as being too barbaric to be part of the Roman Empire. And so from about 47 AD to about 300 AD, Druidism has to go underground, and it's eventually syncretized. So you take Celtic Druidism, and from 47 AD to about 300 AD, that's about a period of 2.5 centuries, 250 years, Celtic Druidism eventually becomes syncretized into Roman paganism. And so Druidism and Romanism meet, and they syncretize and they fall in love with one another. So you got Druidism plus Pomona goddess worship. The Romans were practitioners of worshiping many goddesses. One of their chief goddesses was Pomona, and you would worship Pomona. You would do things like bobbing for apples and things of that nature. But the Druids had a practice where they had an apple bobbing type of thing, but it's slightly different. They would have a pot of boiling oil, and they would put, they would give you a chance. You would either be sacrificed, or you had the option of playing the bobbing apple game, where you would stick your face into a pot of boiling oil and see if you could grab an apple with your teeth. And if you were willing to live with getting your face burnt off, you could avoid being sacrificed to the gods of SAH-WEEN. And so that was one of the abominable practices that Julius Caesar thought was so horrific that Druidism should be outlawed in the areas, including Britannia. Rome spread and took over Britannia eventually, which is now known as the British Isles, which includes Scotland and Ireland, and was the home eventually of the Druidic priests and the practice of Druidism. And so they again had to go underground and eventually syncretize themselves into Roman paganism. But then in about 325 AD, there was another, major turning point that affected the face of the Roman Empire, and unfortunately affected the face of what we call Christianity. Christianity, this rogue religion that had risen up in 32 AD with the supposed resurrection of a Jewish prophet and rabbi whom the Romans had crucified, supposedly came back from the dead 3 days later, and from that, a whole brand new outbranch of the Jewish religion was spreading around the world, and interestingly enough, it was incorporating Gentiles as well. So the Romans were very well aware of what eventually became known as Christianity, and they did their best to stamp out Christianity by trying to kill as many Christians as they could, throwing them to the lions, tearing them in pieces, and the more they killed them, the faster this new religious belief system that was centered on the belief that Jesus of Nazareth was God in human flesh, whom the Romans had killed, but who would come back from the dead 3 days later and was coming to establish a kingdom on the earth in the future. And so eventually in about 325 AD, Christianity had so infected the Roman Empire, including conversions of even people in Caesar's own household, that eventually one of the emperors who took control, who was in control at that time, Emperor Constantine, he eventually had a religious experience, which I believe was initiated by Satan himself, to brilliantly syncretize into Roman paganism this new thing called Christianity that was spreading throughout the Roman Empire and threatening Satan's control over the Roman state. So 325 AD, the Roman Catholic Church really begins. Now the Catholics will tell you that they started with Peter back in the 32 AD or something like that, but no. The Roman Catholic Church as we know it today really didn't start until about 325 AD when Emperor Constantine signed the Edicts of Toleration, which says we're no longer going to treat Christianity as a brigand of outlaws that can be killed sight unseen, and we're no longer going to execute Christians for believing in Jesus. And from the Edicts of Toleration, Emperor Constantine supposedly saw a vision in the sky that was a burning red cross, not a cross like Jesus' cross crucified on, but a pagan cross, the plus sign, a red plus sign burning in the sky that led him to believe that he was supposed to be the leader of and protector of Christianity. And so he became the first protector of the Christian faith that was headquartered in Rome, was really established by Peter and Paul, doing evangelism in the city of Rome. And so some people might give credit to Peter, some people might give credit to Paul for really getting the church started. I think Paul probably is the one that gets the most credit for starting the church in Rome. And then after he's decapitated in a Mamertine prison outside of Rome, Peter took over and helped build up the church until Peter was eventually crucified outside the city of Rome. And the church continued to grow based on the blood of the martyrs of Peter and Paul. And so this Christian church that was really established through the blood sacrifice of Peter and Paul in the 60s AD eventually became this incredibly powerful force that even the Roman Empire bowed the knee to. And it bowed the knee to it by Emperor Constantine saying, I'm going to become the protector of the church. And he took a title for himself, Pontifex Maximus. Pontifex Maximus is a Latin phrase which means the supreme bridge builder. Bridge builder is what the term pontifex means. We get from that pontoon bridge, where it's like a temporary bridge you build over a river when we were in Vietnam trying to go through the marshes and swamps and all that. So he took the title Supreme Bridge Builder. So what we find out then is Constantine was building a bridge between ancient Roman paganism, which was really a type of ancient Babylonian paganism, and had syncretized into itself over the course of time from 47 AD. The Druidic priests had gone into the Roman system, into the Roman system of paganism, and hid there because it was now against the law to practice Druidism openly. So they became part and parcel of Roman paganism. And so when Constantine became the Pontifex Maximus of the Church of Rome, he then brought with him Roman paganism and Celtic Druidism. And so the three were mixed together in an unhealthy mixture. And so that happens at about 325 AD. The Roman Catholic Church begins the state church system. Emperor Constantine becomes really the first pope and becomes the Pontifex Maximus, who builds a bridge between ancient Babylonian paganism, Celtic Druidism, and modern day, at that time, Roman Christianity. And that's where you get your Roman Catholic Church from. From 325 AD to about 500 AD, another 200 years or so, SAH-WEEN, which was a Druidic religious practice system, is now fully adopted and Christianized. And it is from that that we get All Hallows Eve, or Halloween. The SAH-WEEN festival of worshiping the dead on a special harvest day of November 1st was changed by the Roman church system. And so now you had the first pope, which was Constantine, and then after that you had, in the 500s AD, you had specifically Pope Gregory the Great adopted Druidism into Catholicism, and SAH-WEEN's day, or SAH-WEEN, the Celtic Druid Festival, celebrated November 1st, was rechristened by Pope Gregory III as a All Saints Day. All Saints Day was November 1st, and the day before that became, the day before, sort of like the Christmas Eve before Christmas Day. So SAH-WEEN's Day was sort of rechristened as All Hallows or All Saints Day. Saints meaning sanctified, set apart, or holy, or hallow. This is holy ground, this is hallowed ground. So it was alternatively referred to as All Hallows Day or All Saints Day, November 1st. The night or the day before that was the evening before the big celebration of All Saints Day or All Hallows Day. And so eventually in the 500s under Pope Gregory the Great, the day before the Druidic SAH-WEEN Day, which had now been syncretized or converted or Christianized into All Saints Day or All Hallows Day, where you worship the dead saints of the Bible as opposed to the dead ancestors and the demons. And so the day before that was known as All Hallows Eve. And so again, because this is a religious practice that eventually became headquartered or predominant in the British Isles, particularly amongst the Scotch Gaelic people, the Gaelic language, which was a little different from English, gave it a different pronunciation. So Halloween is really a contracted form of the Gaelic word for the evening before All Hallows Day, or Halloween. Hallows Day's evening. The evening before All Hallows Day became Halloween, and eventually Halloween is the contracted anglicized form of basically a Gaelic word for the evening before All Saints Day, which was really the ancient Druidic Day of the Dead. And if you notice, in most countries that practice Roman Catholicism, Mexico has a Day of the Dead, you have a Day of the Dead in Europe, and actually even non-Catholic nations have a Day of the Dead that's based in the fall. And again, dating all the way back to Greek mythology, Proserpina and Pluto, where Proserpina, the beautiful young girl who lived on the earth, was seen by Hades, also known as Pluto, and he fell in love with her. He was the god of the underworld, and he kidnapped her and took her underground and struck a deal so that she would spend 6 months underground with him as his queen if he let her leave, and she could spend 6 months above ground as sort of the mother of the spring. So she would go down into the earth at the end of the fall and live with him through the winter, and then in springtime she could come back. And that's the mythology that arose out of why does it get cold and dark in the fall after the crops are harvested And then in the springtime, it gets bright and beautiful and flowers grow. Well, because Pluto, Hades, released Proserpina from the underground. So again, these paganized practices are part and parcel of how Satan steals away the glory that belongs to God alone. God set up the planet Earth in the orbit of the Earth around the sun on a specific pattern on purpose so that we could have 4 seasons, so that we could have 24-hour days that are divided into basically 12 days, 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness, with variations depending upon how close we get to the sun, and days get longer as you go into summer, and days get shorter as you go into winter. And so from that you have the winter solstice of December 21st that eventually arose as another important part of the pagan sky god worship system. So Halloween, the high holy day of October 31st, became the day that the evening before the dead were worshipped. So Halloween became this special day that was only competed with in terms of importance in this pagan worship of the seasons by the summer solstice, which was the shortest day of the year and therefore the darkest day of the year, and the day of the year when the dead are at their greatest. But the veil supposedly between the dead and the living was the thinnest on October 31st, which really is the initiation of the season of death. As the earth grows colder and the crops die, the season of death is worshipped, and it reaches its high point, its apex, if you will, on December 21st, which is the winter solstice. So from October 31st, Halloween, to the winter solstice, death increases and it's worshipped and honored as part and parcel of all of that. So again, Pope Gregory the Great is partially responsible for All Hallows Day of November 1st, and Halloween, the evening before, becoming the big celebration evening. Another tradition that arose from out of that, today we have pumpkins. Albert told us a couple of weeks ago that Charlie Brown Christmas won't be seen on network TV for the first time since 1965 because it was the rights to it was bought by Apple, which is a computer store, and so it'll never be seen on television. Turns out that they bought the rights to all the Charlie Brown specials, and so it's Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, which will be airing this week, either on CBS or on ABC. It also won't be aired, but the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, that was the second most popular of the Charlie Brown specials. About pumpkins and Halloween were closely related to one another. It really started out in Europe as a turnip gourd, because they didn't grow pumpkins in Europe. That was an American, North American produce piece. It was a turnip gourd that was hollowed out, and a coal would be dropped into it in person. The whole story of Jack-o'-lantern, if we get time, we'll go ahead and talk about that. Really started out with the Irish, and it wasn't until after the Irish Potato Famine that when they exported themselves here to the United States, since we didn't have turnip gourds and they didn't have pumpkins in Ireland, they used pumpkins to replace the turnip gourd, and that's how carving pumpkins came about. So let's move on. Point 6, again, 325 AD, Roman Catholic Church begins the state church system. Emperor Constantine becomes the first pope, the Pontifex Maximus, and syncretizes Christianity with Roman paganism and Celtic Druidism. Now we move to point 7, 325 to 500 AD. Druidic SAH-WEEN is Christianized as All Hallows Eve and October 31st based religious worship of the nature system, paganism, which we now practice or celebrate as Halloween. And what we're doing innocently as a kid growing up in the Midwest, going trick-or-treating and carving pumpkins and doing all that, was a big part of what it meant to grow up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and in almost every community in the Midwest. Agrarian farming communities next to small college towns like Ann Arbor is the seat of the University of Michigan. Same thing in Bloomington, Indiana, where Indiana University. So you had these traditions tied to, particularly in the Midwest, but spread throughout the United States, that were really the modern day iterations of ancient Babylonian and Celtic Druid worship systems of occultism and in essence demonism, but we didn't know it. So point 8 on our 13-point outline of the roots of Halloween and how they can be correctly tied to Satan himself. 500 AD to the Middle Ages, All Hallows Eve spreads to Britannia as a Catholic sacrament, meaning England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, the future Great Britain basically adopted All Hallows Eve as a Catholic sacrament. Now the Catholic Church had become a powerful military as well as a religious force, and the Catholic Church was now obviously persecuting the Puritans in England. And, you know, I talked last week a little bit about John Bunyan, who was put in jail, you know, by the state church system in England, which was really kind of an outgrowth of the Roman state church system, and how people who wanted to worship God directly from the Bible were oftentimes persecuted. And so the Catholic Church was great at persecuting individuals that didn't want to follow Catholic sacraments but wanted to follow the Bible alone. So from that time to the Middle Ages, things became pretty dark around the world because the Bible was taken away from the people and given to the Catholic priests, and it was translated into Latin. And if you didn't read Latin, and you couldn't read the Bible, and most of the people couldn't read anyway, anything. And so you had the Dark Ages arising as a result of that. But it was during this period of time, from 500 AD to the Middle Ages, that the traditions of the jack-o'-lantern, costumes of demons became, which we've already dated back to 2000 BC. The Celtic Druids and their SAH-WEEN festivals became very popular during the Middle Ages. Trick-or-treating and apple bobbing, going door to door, that became very, very popular. The jack-o'-lantern tradition, just briefly, you know, an Irish folk tale says that Jack was a guy who was wandering around a tree grove, and this Irishman named Jack, he saw Satan, goodness forbid, in a grove of trees, and he saw Satan, the devil, climb the tree. And so Jack, you know, being a religious guy, made the sign of the cross on the tree. This is really pagan. Making the sign of the cross, you know, traps a demon or, you know, kills Dracula and these things. So this is really sort of a Roman Catholic sort of, you know, perversion of Christian theology into a mythos. So Jack sees the devil climb a tree. Jack puts the cross on the tree, which traps the devil in the tree. And the devil says, "Get rid of that cross and let me down." And Jack says, you know, being a clever Irishman as I am, I won't let you down unless we make an agreement there. So if you agree to not take me into hell when my life is over, because I probably won't make it into heaven, I will agree to get rid of the cross and let you down. And so he forced Satan, the devil, to make a deal. And so now the devil, instead of the devil making a deal, you know, he gets trapped and tricked into making a deal. So he promised Jack that if God doesn't let him into heaven in the afterlife, Satan wouldn't drag him down into hell. And so at the end of Jack's life, because he's a clever Irishman, but also manipulative and not born again, he winds up getting kicked out at the pearly gates and can't get into heaven. So the only other place is hell. And as he's wandering along the gates, trotting his way into hell, Satan is about to grab him and drag him in. He says, you gave me your word. As if Satan would keep his word anyway. He says, you gave me your word that, you know, that I wouldn't have to, you know, go to hell because I let you out of the tree. And so Satan, remembering the deal, apparently gets angry and reaches down into the coals, because, you know, hell is supposedly, it's got these burning coals and fire, and in these burning coals and fire, you have, you know, people being tormented. And so the idea being that in these burning coals of fire, people are being tormented. Jack is going to be tormented. But Satan says, oh yeah, I remember that I'm not supposed to let you in hell. He reaches down, grabs one of the coals, and because in his frustration, he throws it at Jack. And Jack is basically, you know, hello? So Jack basically gets a coal piece thrown at him, and now Jack is wandering through all of eternity with a piece of coal. And what does Jack do? Jack takes a turnip gourd and he carves it out and he makes a face in it. And he makes this.
Hello.
Yeah, could you sit him up?
May I help you?
Yeah, you just called? 1907? Is there somebody down there for 1907?
What's 1907?
It's an apartment.
No, sir, I don't.
Okay, so, sorry about that. So anyway, as it turns out, so Jack carves out a hideous face on a turnip gourd to scare away the other demons, and he puts the coal inside of it, and the legend goes on to say that he walks around with a turnip gourd with a coal, a burning coal inside of it, for all of eternity. And that's basically what he has to do, because he can't go to heaven because he's not a good guy, and he also can't go to hell. And so that's where we get the tradition of carving pumpkins. But again, in Ireland, there were no pumpkins to carve, so they carved turnip gourds.
Security front desk?
Yeah, is there somebody there for 1907?
Yes, speaking.
Yeah, can you sit them up?
Okay.
And so that's where pumpkin carving comes from. And that's an interesting story, But let's go ahead on to the next major point. 1776.9. The United States of America is founded. And the Puritan Christians, who are basically kind of at war with the Church of England, which is a modern sort of a British iteration of the Roman church system. But there was a falling out with one of the kings of England about getting married, Anne Boleyn, and all that kind of stuff. And so eventually the Church of England was formed to become a competing church for the Roman Catholic Church. But they were both church systems that was dictated to by the kings, the Roman Pope and the King of England. So the Puritans, not wanting to be dictated to on how they worship God, came to the United States of America when the opportunity began to colonize the New World. Puritans took that opportunity not to go off to become rich and famous and find gold in our hills, but really to escape religious persecution. And so we find in 1776, basically the colonies that were the Puritans that come over in the 1600s eventually rebelled against the the sort of Roman paganized English church system and the King of England, and the colonies, the Revolutionary War occurred, and the USA was founded primarily by Puritan Christians who didn't want to be Roman Catholics and didn't want to be Anglicans and didn't want to be part of a church-state system. And so part and parcel of the early founding fathers in the United States of America, All Hallows Eve was outlawed. So the celebration of All Hallows Eve, what we call Halloween, that was outlawed because they saw that as part of a Roman pagan practice. Remember, the pagan Druids had kind of syncretized into the Roman Catholic Church system, and when the Puritans separated themselves from the state church system of England, they were also separating themselves from the state church system of Rome and the papal system. So, part and parcel of that was Roman Catholics basically were not welcome in the United States of America in 1776, and neither was Halloween, as All Hallows Eve was banned as a religious practice. Then we take it to the next point, point 10 on our 13-point outline. In 1840, the Irish Potato Famine occurred. That was a big, important geopolitical event because what that did is, apparently it was some kind of a fungus or virus, a fungus in the tubers, which are what potatoes were, and so they all rotted. So the Irish people who were primarily surviving on potatoes as their form of starch and carbohydrate were starving to death. And so masses of Irish individuals came from Ireland to the United States by way of immigration and brought with them what? Roman Catholicism, as the Irish were still Catholic. The British were now part of the Church of England because there had been that schism. The King of England said, I want to get married to such and so, and the Pope says, I'm excommunicating you, and the King of England said, I'm excommunicating you and start my own Catholic Church. Well, I'm going to call it the English Anglican Church. And so now we find out then that all of these guys, Roman Catholics, really weren't welcome in the United States of America at our nation's founding in 1776, start coming over in droves in 1840. And with them, they bring Irish Catholic tradition, immigration, and with that comes the practice of All Hallows Eve, which is now a Catholic sacrament. We know it's actually Celtic Druidism and Roman paganism syncretized together, but now it's part and parcel of the Catholic system. And now that we've gotten to the 1840s, feelings aren't quite as hard towards the British and all those guys as it was in 1776. And now the Irish are allowed to come over. And our next point, point 11, from about 1840, the time of the Irish Potato Famine, till 1900, here in the USA, SAH-WEEN, which is now called Halloween, remember it's Scotch Gaelic term, it's now called Halloween as opposed to All Hallows Eve. It's just called in the anglicized form Halloween. SAH-WEEN and Halloween are really one and the same. Remember, SAH-WEEN's the festival, Fall Harvest Festival, October 31st to November 1st, where you burn people in the Wicker Man, you burn people in the bonfires, and you worship the gods of the sky, SAH-WEEN, and hope the crops grow by killing your kids. And so now we see that from a period of time from 1840 to 1900, the United States, as a general rule, continued to reject this Irish Catholic sort of tradition known as Halloween. But from the 1900s onward, from 1980 on into the early 1900s, now you find what you always find, right? You find some form of compromise, you find some form of, live and let live. We got a bunch of Irish Catholics over here, we're not so worried about stuff like we used to be. And again, the longer things go, I was talking to Genevieve tonight, I posted on Facebook and on, our YouTube video, the lost tapes from our original South Beach Gospel Ministry. We didn't even call ourselves that then. Our original Halloween expose, which Steve, you were a part of, and you helped do all the equipment setup for that. And Genevieve was saying how awesome, it was a 4-hour-long event. Our camera at the time was I didn't know how to run it. The battery died. I only recorded an hour and then 20 minutes of questioning, but. Again, when that started out back in 2012, she said, how many people were there? I said, 50 or 60 people. Full backyard, sitting right on the Biscayne Bay, and she was like, wow, that was a lot. And over time, the group gets smaller, Steve. It's not, and she's like, well, Herb, it ain't because you're teaching, because your teachings are intense. It's not because the teachings become less biblical or less interesting. It's because over time, the fire grows cold. And that's what happened in the United States. Halloween was against the law. Catholicism was against the law in 1776. You couldn't come to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and be a Catholic priest because they didn't allow Catholics because they were considered to be agents of evil with their Jesuit priests trying to work their way in and do things. It wasn't until 1789 that the first Catholic university, which got a ring there, with the law school there, Georgetown University, became the first to break through the veil and establish a Catholic university on U.S. soil in 1789, just a few months before Washington, D.C. was actually created. So Georgetown predates by a few months Washington, D.C. being created from contribution of land from Virginia and Maryland. And so, but historically, compromise sets in over time. If you start doing stuff long enough, people start disappearing. And I was like, man, I was listening to the last year tape when Ben was here and Genevieve was telling the story. I don't know if you guys recall from last year, but it's on YouTube if you want to take a listen. Genevieve gave a story about how she was raised by a mother who was involved in witchcraft and how she was passed through the fire in some witchcraft ritual, and her mother was a practicing witch, and she was subjected to all kinds of satanic rituals as a child before she came to Christ, which is why she's such an intense person. So anybody want to hear Genevieve's testimony, it's on our YouTube page, and look up Halloween in the search engine, and you'll see all the teachings that we've given through the years on Halloween. She's from the 2019 one, where she gave a really good, interesting testimony about what it was like being raised by a practicing witch. And so witchcraft is glorified in Halloween. And again, the point was that as you go on, there's compromise, and so from the 1900s onward, you know, the Puritans who were really the guts and glue of the maize and glue, as Bobby used to say about Michigan football. The guts and glue of American Christianity were the Puritans, the guys who just wanted the Bible, the guys, the Plymouth Brethren types, who were God's word alone, no state church, no pope, no king over the church, just the word of God and Jesus himself. And then you start compromising. So now you're allowing Roman Catholicism to sort of syncretize and spread, and even though you're not going to adopt Roman Catholicism as your form of Christianity, you start celebrating the Roman Catholic, Celtic Druid, Roman Pagan SAH-WEEN festival, which has now been recast under the name Halloween, All Hallows Eve. Sounds more religious.
Sure.
It's the evening before we worship the saints. It used to be the evening before you worship the dead,
Yeah.
right? And we see in every nation touched by Catholicism, Day of the Dead is a big thing. Mexico got their own Day of the Dead. I mentioned that, you know, Disney had bought out, you know, the Charlie Brown Christmas, but they also bought out It's a Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, so that's not going to be shown on TV. And they bought the rights, so you're not going to see any of the Charlie Brown specials, which was written and illustrated by Charles Schultz, who was a born-again Christian, who put Christian themes, especially in the Charlie Brown Christmas. And now, since they own the rights to the Peanuts characters, and Charles Schultz is dead and now gone to heaven, Apple will now be recasting and rewriting new episodes of the Peanuts, but they'll be worshiping paganism, you know, Mother Nature, goddess worship is the next Charlie Brown special that's planned. Now that Apple is a freaking computer store. You know, these tech giants are evil and run by the Luciferians, are doing evil things. So you take the Christian-themed Charlie Brown Christmas off network TV for the first time since most of us have been alive, and now you're going to redo it, and it's going to be a pagan sky goddess that will be worshipped. So again, over time, United States of America let its guard down. Halloween began gaining acceptance. Point 12, from 1900 onward, Halloween, as I said, gains acceptance in the USA to the final point. Point 13, Halloween is now the most popular adult holiday in the United States of America. Well, as I said before, $8.2 billion, billion with a B as a boy, $1 billion in sales in the United States of America alone, for a holiday, Stephen, as I pointed out in teachings past, that lasts for really about 6 hours. It goes from sundown in the Midwest where I grew up, in Michigan, you know. Well, I remember junior Wolverine football, we'd have football practice be over at 5:30. You rode your bike home, the last trick, rode home as fast as you could because the sun would be going down. You get out of practice about 5, you can get home on your bicycle about 5:30 and get your costume on because it would be dark. Yeah. So, you know, sundown would occur at about 6 o'clock, you know, and so, you know, your parents being what it was, you know, you could go out and trick or treat, but you could go from about 6 to 9, a couple of times we got to go to 11, you know, because it was nice. And I remember Midwest, and you grew up in Alabama, people weren't quite as evil and crazy, so you could get away with being out almost to midnight sometimes, and especially if the weather was okay and cooperative. But really, you're talking from 6 to midnight, and then that's it. But by the time we got to 2017, we were already over $9 billion in sales. And it's not kids at Walmart or Kmart or Sears buying the little Spider-Man costumes. It's adults too. And that's where the money really started. It went from being just kids to kids and the adults. And so now, as of 2019, probably right around $10 billion. Now, as I pointed out earlier, before you got here, Steve, is that because of COVID-19, we don't know what will happen this year. But remember last year, on Halloween night, we were on Lincoln Road passing out thousands of gospel tracts to people clad in costumes. It was the most awesome evangelism experience ever. Lincoln Road on South Beach. This year, we're going to be on South Beach again on Saturday, and we're going to finish up what we don't get to tonight related to Halloween. And but who knows what the crowds will be like? We don't know. I mean, we had that big evangelism track attack night. I don't have that scheduled now because of the social distancing thing, but we're going to be there Saturday morning, and we'll play it by ear. We'll have our tracks, and we'll be there. But as I said, Steve, as time goes on, I think as we get closer, Jesus said this. I feel bad because I said when I started tonight, I was like, when I first started this in 2012, and I didn't know what I was doing, I had like 50, 60 people from 4 different churches.
How about that?
I said, now, last year we had Ben and Steve and Genevieve, and like that. So it's just me. Lord, what am I doing wrong? And then the Lord reminded me. He said, remember when I asked the rhetorical question,
Right.
when the Son of Man returns, will he find the faith on the earth? In other words, Dave Hunter gave a great teaching on it. He's saying as we get closer to the end times, as we get farther into Laodicean paganism in the church, Laodicean paganism in the church, not in the world, but in the church, we see people less interested in things of the Lord. When we could go from having, half 100 people on just word of mouth, talk some strange guy they never met before talking about Halloween, and they would be there from 7 o'clock. People started arriving. People didn't go home until about 1 o'clock in the morning. That was quite a night. And so, and again, last I didn't get home from the Halloween street evangel thing last year. I got home about one in the morning.
Yeah.
And tired but happy. And so here we are in 2020. Churches are shut down, and I just wonder, have people lost interest in the things of the Lord? So again, that's the 13 points. The most interesting or the most popular of all of the Halloween or of all the holidays, is Halloween. Christmas, even Christmas itself, which runs over a longer period of time, is based on commerce of buying and selling presents, can still outsell Halloween. But for a one-day event, nothing begins to compete with Halloween. And so the point I made in the outline that I'll attach in the notes and comments section of our videos. So I'll put quite a bit of information for those of you who go right to the description box on our YouTube video platform, and you'll be able to copy and paste the outline that I wrote for this Halloween festival. And so as I put in there, one of the videos, I said Druidism is back. It's just disguised as now an Americanized holiday tradition known as Halloween. Halloween and Druidism is the same thing. Halloween and SAH-WEEN are the same thing. You celebrate SAH-WEEN, also mispronounced Samhain, and Druidism by human blood sacrifices. And so, as I've said before, as a prosecutor in 3 different states, I've prosecuted satanic ritual murders. And I can assure you, on Halloween night, somewhere in the world, probably in a community very close to you, kids will be kidnapped, kids will go missing, and somebody will become a satanic ritual sacrifice. Satanic ritual murders occur with great frequency throughout the United States, throughout the world, on the evening of October 31st. So it's not all fun and games and candy and trick-or-treating and all you have to do is worry about somebody putting a needle in your candy. Worse stuff than that happens. They can't do a real bonfire where they set people on fire because that's against the law. So just like we saw the Celtic Druid priests did back when Rome defeated the Celts in the Gallic Wars, the Druid priests went underground and snuck into Roman paganism. And one of the interesting things was the Catholic priests, who were really the priests of Babylon, they were the ancient Semiramis Nimrodian priests of that Babylonian Mystery Babylon system, were really the Catholic priests. So behind them was Luciferian darkness as well, whether they realized it or not. So when the Druid priests tried to syncretize or sneak into the Catholic Church system, they were welcomed with open arms because they had powers. Like, wait, you can make the rock talk, you can make the tree cause the crops to grow. How do you do that? Show me how you do that. I will show you my priestly tricks, and you show me your druidic priestly tricks. Well, you must do this. There must be a blood sacrifice, and you do it on certain days. And so you got the Catholic priests becoming corrupted even more by the Druid priests, who are now syncretized into Catholicism, which is why Catholicism has such abominable practices, right? That has the reputation of pedophilia, has the reputation of doing dark things like covering up things and even killing people. And that is based upon the fact that they brought the Druids into the Roman Catholic priest system. So Druidism is back. Druidism lives on in the Roman Catholic priesthood, and it lives on in American pop culture through the practice of the religion, and I would call it a religion, the religion of Halloween. And so, again, I've sort of synopsized it and made it as short and sweet as possible. And there's a number of verses that that we can look at, and we're going to look at some of those on Saturday when we finish this up. But just to finish up tonight, what I'll do is I will point out that I remember at the end of the 2012 very first inaugural Halloween expose, I remember I read a verse and people were like, man, that was right on point. It says, you know, had no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. And so that's exactly, so when people ask, oh, is it okay for Christians to practice or participate in Halloween? Well, Ephesians chapter 5 verse 11 says this, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. It says in King James, expose them, it says in the New King James. So I would say based upon Ephesians chapter 5 verse 11, and there's a ton of other verses, and believe me, this talk has gone on in years past, you know, 2.5 hours over 2 different days, so 5 hours, but I'm giving you guys, you know, the redacted, the rapture could happen any day now, short version, because I was told that, you know, with the short attention spans of people, the shorter your video on YouTube, the more likely you are to get people to listen to it all the way through, so I'm going to keep it short tonight. But yeah, Ephesians 5 and 11, Steve, read that for us.
Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them.
And that's exactly what my answer would be to anyone that asks the question, can a Christian participate in Halloween? Well, it was John Walvoord who gave a Bible prophecy scholar, former president of Dallas Theological Seminary. He was asked the question, he came to Calvary Chapel in Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and gave a lecture on Bible prophecy, and he was getting asked some question and answer session, and, or, you know, gosh, no, you know, I'm thinking of Dr. Henry Morris, who wrote The Long War Against God. And The Long War Against God was an expose of the pagan roots of the Darwinian evolutionary system. And so somebody asked Dr. Henry Morris, he said, well, is it possible for a Christian to be an evolutionist? And, you know, it's a tough theological, like, are you saying that if you believe in Darwinian evolution, you can't be born again? He said, look, Christians can be a number of things that they ought not be.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it right, though. So yeah, could you technically believe in Darwinian evolution and still somehow mistakenly believe the gospel enough to get saved? Possibly, but it doesn't make it right.
Right.
Can a Christian practice Halloween and trick-or-treating? Yeah, because I did it as a kid, but it wasn't right. And it's dangerous. And actually Bill Schneebelein, who, you know, started out,
right, yeah.
you know, he you know, has a Christian ministry for many years, said he became involved in witchcraft and Satanism and demonic possession because he went trick-or-treating one night in the Midwest. And I was thinking, like, that sounded exactly like many of my nights. You know, when we go trick-or-treating, then we go running through the graveyard because we knew dead spirits are supposed to be there, and it was scary. Like, I can feel the ghosts here. You can feel the demons. And you run out scared, and it was fun because it was scary.
Sure.
And he had the same experience growing up in the Midwest, but he got demon-possessed and eventually became a Satanist and got involved in all kinds of horrible practices like drinking human blood and getting involved in human ritual sacrifices. And he says it all started out as a teenager one night while trick-or-treating in the Midwest in the United States of America. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He's in, like, it might have been Illinois or Indiana.
Yeah.
And he said the demon spirits talked to him from the trees, and they appeared like bats in a tree. And he said, you belong to us now. And he fell in love with the darkness. And so, again, I'm not saying that anytime you go trick-or-treating, and this year, 2020, who knows? I don't know how much trick-or-treating will be allowed because of COVID-19, so it may have resolved itself, but there are going to be Halloween-themed parties and Halloween-themed things we already see popping up. I'm not saying that each and every time somebody goes trick-or-treating, they're going to get demon possessed. But if it could happen 1 out of 100 times, is it possible that Halloween is really a door, just like the Celtic Druids had been saying, that the veil between the dead and the demonic and the living is at its very thinnest, Steve, and they can punch through the veil for that 12-hour period of darkness, starting when sundown comes, and that's where our costume wearing comes from. Steve, again, as I said, you would put on a costume and dress up as a demon because you had to go to the Publix to get milk for your newborn baby because your wife couldn't breastfeed because she was sick or something, so you had to go get milk. But if you went to Publix, you might get hijacked by the demons who saw you walking around because they were attacking human beings, because these are really satanic emissaries and they hate and envy human beings. So you would dress up as a demon so the demons would mistake you for one of theirs. And do we not do the same now?
Wow.
We have Halloween parties, Steve, huh? That's symbolic on a couple of different levels. Satan's like, oh, no. They were all participating in my religion. Leave them alone. Even bless them, if you will. That's why Benny Hinn and all those fraudulent TV evangelists and ministers make so much money, because Satan is the god of this world. He makes sure that their ministries are blessed. So they will continue to preach a perverted gospel. And so I remember last year I read a book about Halloween, and a woman who's a witch, she was saying, it thrills me to no end to see people who call themselves Christians practicing my religion and worshiping my gods. It just fills me with joy. It makes me feel ratified in the rightness of my cause. So witches are being inspired by Christian kids going around trick-or-treat, being allowed to do so by Christian parents who dress their kids up as demons and witches. That's the most popular. Devils, demons, and witches are the most popular of all the dress up. Whatever popular Marvel comic book film notwithstanding, that particular Spider-Man might be popular one year and it might be Superman another year. But every year, the devil and his witches and demons are popular. Every year, that sells. And so, with that, I'll end it on that note. Saturday, we'll continue on. We'll pick up some of the scriptural imperatives that we haven't had time to look at, tonight. Got a message from Albert. Albert says, I was partnered up with Stephen G. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Talking about last year's street evangelism Halloween Blitz. Albert was there, and he was saying, he was with Steve and Genevieve, and we had quite a time.
Man,
Ben was there, and
it was
just
packed up there. That was fun.
So,
I gotta say,
good time, man. It's exciting when you go out and do things for the Lord, and that's why things like the Super Bowl coming to town, or Halloween, a satanic occult. We've turned Halloween into a platform for the gospel of Jesus Christ every year for almost a decade now, and the time has gone by so fast, and yet things have changed so much. But again, the verses that we haven't looked at yet, I can show you that zombies are real. I can show you witches are real. I can show you that ghosts are real. All of these concepts that we say, it's just make believe. When I would ask my dad, are monsters real? Ghosts are real? God, no, it's all make believe. But why am I so terrified at night? Why do I feel strange? When after participating in these occultic holidays, why do I feel fear? Because they actually are real. The rumors you've heard, they're all true. But what we don't recognize is that evil has a face, evil is a real person, and evil, Satan, has real emissaries. Halloween is a way of causing innocent individuals who would never worship the devil otherwise to participate in the unfruitful works of darkness, which the practice of Halloween, and believe me, as a Midwesterner, man, it was a part of the zeitgeist of my childhood, and I don't speak against my childhood upbringing in the magical city of Ann Arbor and the wonderful time that I grew up in the Midwest, when you could leave your door open at night, go to a Michigan football game on Saturday, go trick-or-treating the next night, and it was a wonderful and awesome time. But the fact of the matter is, what I did in ignorance, because my parents didn't know any better, I didn't know any better, the Bible says it's far time to put away the foolish things of darkness, the things you did in ignorance, Paul says, put away those things, Galatians, don't do the things that, we got Vaughn, who actually popped into town last week, had a chance to have brunch with Vaughn on Saturday, is back up in Wisconsin, So, Vaughn, good to see you out there, bro. It was good seeing you on Saturday, so Vaughn will be coming back down to see us hopefully soon. So, but again, what we are seeing then is our parents allowed us to do things in ignorance because they didn't know any better. And so now that, as it says in Daniel chapter 12, as we get closer and closer to the return of Christ, knowledge shall increase. And I think what is happening is, you know, Halloween worshiper like me, man, I loved it. We had a school parade. We didn't even have a school parade for Christmas in Michigan. We had one for Halloween, though. We marched from school, got to march down the street all the way to our house, and past my mom's house and dad's house, and back to the school. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And you dress up in your little costume, and it was awesome, man. And I don't speak against these things lightly, but what I'm saying is what we did in foolishness, we now know better. And so, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, you know, we have no fellowship with unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. And that's what we're doing. We're exposing Halloween as something no Christian should be involved in. Halloween is something that no thinking, intelligent human being should be involved in because of its tie in with ancient Druidic, Celtic Druidism, which included human blood sacrifice, killing children, and dates itself and ties itself back to the Mystery Babylon system of the Tower of Babel, which included not only raping children, but killing them as well to make the crops grow. Catholic priests have a big issue with childhood molestation. Where does that come from? I would submit it came from the Celtic Druid priests that they allowed into the Catholic Church system during the period of time from the 300s through the 500s AD. It comes from ancient Babylonian paganism, which is what the Catholic priesthood system is really based upon. Anyway, The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop spells that out perfectly. Dave Hunt's A Woman Rides the Beast. So with that, again, I'm going to end it there, let you close in prayer, but Saturday, we'll be down in South Beach. Saturday, Halloween Day, we'll be at our outpost down at Ocean 15th with our tracks, and we'll be making closing comments on Halloween and the scriptural support for the idea that demons, monsters, even vampires are real. And the Bible makes reference to them and warns us that they are alive and well and a threat to human existence. And so we shouldn't participate in glorifying that. We shouldn't give energy, as the witch said. She loves it when Christians participate in her religion and give our psychic and spiritual energy to her gods. It's a way of showing that her gods are superior to our God, Jesus, who is weak. If we come to worship her gods on their high holy day, what does that say for our Jesus? So it sets a bad example, and it opens the door of occult. It's like playing with a Ouija board as a kid, which we were allowed to do as children, and it had some bad consequences. Playing with the Ouija boards, same as going trick-or-treating, same as dressing up as a demon. You become one of them, and when you become one of them, they'll give you favor. You get presents, toys, candy, and you get the approval of Satan, Steve. So if you had a little kid and you dressed him up as a little demon, say to me, Steve, good job. Way to go, Steven. No, I know you're a religious evangelist dude and you do that South Beach, but I love it how you dress your children up in honor of me. Way to go. And so think about that. And so again, I know Vaughn, he's part of his weekly responsibilities apart from his international business consulting type thing is to sit down and watch this actual Bible teaching with his son and teach him, who's 5 years old now, and he's teaching him the Word of God on a weekly basis. See, this is why you do certain things, this is why you don't do certain things. So his kid is now old enough to begin to understand things like trick-or-treating and Halloween, and now he's got a legitimate biblical-based reason why you're not going to participate in those things, as opposed to no, because I said so, that's why. Kids aren't going to be satisfied with it, but give them the Word of God and explain why we as Christians aren't participating in this very popular, wonderful, fun-filled, especially up in Wisconsin where Vaughn is, up in the Midwest, like I said, that was Halloween capital of the world.
Hayrides,
Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, hayrides, apples, pumpkins, awesomeness. Change of seasons, which is really what this is all about. In the springtime, earth comes alive. Summertime, you impregnate her with the seeds of the ground, And then she gives birth to a fertile yield in the fall. And once you harvest that stuff into the barn, the earth begins to die. And so it's a religion of death. And Halloween is a glorification of the religion of death. And that Satan requires human blood sacrifice as part of it makes it even more reprehensible. So Halloween, no, it is a religion that worships the god of death, Satan, and no Christian should be part of that. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, rather expose it. With that, Steve closes up in prayer, and Saturday we'll pick up where we left off as we're out doing street evangelism in South Beach.
Lord God, we thank you one more time for another opportunity to gather on a teaching as as useful as this one, Lord, because there are many of us born again and not who've fallen for the lures of Halloween festival that as heard pointed out tonight just really is nothing that we ought to have anything to do with. The scripture even said. Lord, so I pray that that the moms and the dads out tonight are listening and paying attention, Lord, that they really understand the urgency of like Vaughn is doing with his kids, to let them know that there's just nothing to toy with, and that Lord, they'll use an opportunity to really be able to establish what the truth is and how to respond to it, Lord. Again, we thank you for just another opportunity for her to delve into the Halloween teaching that we've been doing for, good grief, I guess the last 10 years. Wow. Lord, just one more time here. Hopefully it's the last one, Lord. We pray that your return will be soon, Lord. But if not, then we understand that our job is to occupy until you do return. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
All right, so we'll see you guys Saturday.